everybody, and welcome to another hobby cheating video. And this time we're going to step away from perhaps any particular color or thing like that, and we're going to go back and we're going to talk about technique. And so one of the most common things I see newer painters especially do is use the wrong technique on the wrong model. So that is to say, dry brushing, washing, layering, these are all techniques. And we should think of them like tools in our toolbox. And when you need a hammer, you don't get out a screwdriver. When you need a screwdriver, you don't get out a hammer. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So here's our friendly Chaos Warrior. We remember him from many previous videos. He's still sitting around, waiting for the rest of his friends to join him. And just to kind of look over him, he's fun because he's an interesting example. So you saw how I used the undershading and the glaze technique to do his cloak, right? And so whenever we have these flat surfaces, this is the kind of thing, because it has these ridges, this is the kind of thing I see people try to dry brush a lot. And they'll just sort of drag across the ridges. The problem is you're never going to actually get a smooth color transition out of that, because dry brushing is by its very nature rough and messy, and if you're using white paint, often usually chalky, and it's going to leave drag marks and such here. More or less, no matter how careful you are, it's going to happen. So whenever you've got these large flat surfaces, you really want to think about like the technique we saw previously, undershading it, glazing it, or layers, that kind of thing. But those kinds of techniques aren't necessarily always the right choice. Dry brushing is, of course, well known. I'm not going to explain what it is. I'm just going to assume you all know what dry brushing is, because if you've ever painted a model, you probably figured out what dry brushing is. But you might not necessarily know when is the best time to use it. The best time to use dry brushing is when you want a super high contrast and you have a lot of differentiation in the depth of the model. So here's an easy example of something I use dry brushing on, and it's this fur here. Fur and hair and things like that, those are excellent candidates for dry brushing, right? Because it's going to leave, you want a strong contrast on this, right? You want it to go from very dark to very light, fairly quite suddenly, because you want the individual hairs to stand out. Same thing here on the back of this guy with the fur on his cloak and the hairs on the top of this little ponytail this Chaos Warrior has. Okay? And these are the kind of cases where dry brushing can serve you very well. All right? When you have fur, hair, something that wants to look rough and coarse and natural. Okay? Perhaps as another example, I'll show you here something that I was working on last night. He's very big. Let's see if we can get it down there. All right, there we go. His wings. So you can see here that this Manicore's wings, they have these like veins, they have this ridging effect to them, right? And I wanted to pick that out. So here what I'm going to do is actually combine dry brushing and the glaze technique I showed you from the cloak, right? Because I'm pre-shading this with dry brushing. Before we talk about combining these techniques, which we will get to, let's talk about the next one, which is our old friend, the wash, or the shade, okay? So I don't use much in the way of Citadel paints, but I do love their shade colors. I am also a big fan of P3's washes, so both of these I would say get a thumbs up for me if you're looking for products to use. If you have a different one you use, that's fine too. So I think something that I see a lot of people do often is they'll take a big surface, a big flat surface, okay, say like his hindquarters here or his muscles, and they'll wash it and they'll stop. Okay? So shading is using these shades is a really good time saver, but you need to know, when do I stop with the shade? And the answer is usually here where I dry brushed. Whether I go dry brush and then shade to knock it down, or shade and then dry brush to repick out the highlights. These two techniques really like to work in tandem. Okay, so here, right, on the fur of his cloak, this started gray. I picked it out with white with a dry brush. I washed it all with a blue. I don't remember which one, maybe like a Drakenhof Nightshade or something. And then I went through and dry brushed it again, and then I did do just a little bit of layering on the end where I just took a couple tips and just did a nice quick individual layer. But the point being is that the combination of these two techniques of dry brushing and shading are often very powerful when put together, again, especially on these very rough textured areas. In your flat areas, like his hindquarters here, right, which he has this big exposed hip, if I just left this washed, really no matter how careful I was with the wash or the shade, if I'm using it at all like it's intended to be used, then what's going to happen is it's going to look dirty. It's going to look chalky. It's going to leave behind this residue of what happens when you wash something and don't really layer over it. Okay? So when you've got, you can wash these big areas. I don't want to say never wash a flat surface. You can use the shades to go in and pick out this muscle definition here, like on his leg. All right? But then afterward, it's about cleaning it up. It's about coming back in with that layer. Okay? And that's still going toward a finished model. And that leads me right into the final thing I want to talk about, which is combos. Okay? So when you want to do all of those things, when you're trying to combine all of that. And honestly, the most common place that I end up doing all of it, we'll go back to the Manticore here, is in wings. Okay? This guy already is a combination, where he's at right now, is a combination of all three techniques. And I use everything. We get out the whole toolkit for wings. Wings are huge and beautiful, and when you're looking at this model, its wings and its head are going to be the first things you see. The rest of this body are going to take you a long time to notice. But I guarantee you, you will notice the wings. It's just what your eyes will do because it's such a huge thing. We stare at wings on models. So we want to make sure we're devoting an appropriate amount of time to them and making sure, even more importantly, that we're using that time wisely. So you can see here I started out with the undershading, the zenithal highlighting that I had done in the previous way. Many times I've showed you this, right? What this guy, this little Chaos Warrior, what started him out and what we did for his cloak way back in video 1, right? So we started out here with that. Then what I did is I took some wash and I took it along the edge here to create a nice hard edge and to create some even stronger tonal variance, okay? Then I dry brushed this white over top of it, right? And I know this is about cheating and doing things faster and doing things better, and you might say, Vince, you just did 3 steps before you even actually painted the thing. Well, that's true. I did do that. You got me on that. But really cheated, like my best cheating advice, or one of the best pieces of cheating advice I can give you, is put the time into what matters. Ignore the rest, right? So for tournament scoring, the old thing was bases, faces, banners, and shields. I would add wings onto that in the case of your big monsters. And yes, I've done a lot of this pre-work here with this guy, but that's going to make my final steps way easier, because when I want to come in and actually attack this guy and get him painted, all I'm going to do is come in with a very thin purple glaze, just like we did with this guy's cloak, and instantly we're going to have all of this tonal variation in the purple that we want. And then with just a few other steps of highlighting, maybe we're going to really knock the transition out, so maybe we go back in with a little more highlights to bring this area here back up or something once the purple goes on. We'll have a very nice multicolored wing that really looks like it's got these smooth transitions. Okay? You would do the same things if you tried to do this with layering, and that's all you were doing it with. You might even do the same thing with dry brushing. The problem is if you dry brush on this as your last step, this wing isn't actually rough. Like, it's got these ridges and such, but it's a big leathery wing, assumingly. And leather, you know, has it should have a fairly smooth-ish texture if it's not covered in some kind of fur. You think of a bat wing or something like that, right? So we want to make sure that the technique we're using and we're finishing on, sort of our last step, is going to give us the effect that we want. In the end, we're going to use a lot of these techniques together. We're going to layer, we're going to glaze, we're going to wash, we're going to dry brush, and 10 other things I'm not mentioning in this video, right? The key is oftentimes, and the simplest way to say this is think about the order you do it, right? So here I zenithal highlighted, I washed, and I wanted the white ridges on top, so I dry brushed next, right? You know, with this guy, okay, with his fur, I started very dark, dry brushed some white on, and then did the wash over it with blue and called it, and then went back with a lighter blue and just lightly dry brushed here around the ridge. You can see where this top part is lighter, right? And maybe a little bit here where this is just stands out just a little bit. So there I did finish with a dry brush because I wanted this to look like rough fur and I wanted some more color variation than what I could get out of just washing it all down. Okay, so we're gonna pause this for right now, and when I come back and you see the rest of this, you're gonna see the rest of the manicore and what his wings look like, and we'll talk some more about technique. So we'll see you in a minute. Alright, and we're back, and you can see we've turned the wings purple here. So we're good to go with that. You can see how all we did, so this is one thin glaze of purple. That's it. That's all I did here. And you can see how we've got this nice transition from dark out to light. And I think that came out pretty well. There you go. We'll kind of turn that there, see if we can't catch that. Now, obviously, we could glaze it a few more times if we wanted to do that. And, you know, I'd say that might be exactly what I'd want to do. We could play around with adding some more of the glaze here on the edges if we really wanted to darken these up. And we could work on some more dry brushing and highlighting to bring this up, you know, to create more of a transition. All of those are options, but you can see how even if you wanted to stop here, which, by the way, I think would be fine, you notice how much more of a transition we got here. And this took me no time at all. I mean, I would say, you know, doing I just was running one thin layer of purple glaze over each of these triangles of the wings. I don't know how long it took, but it's probably less than 5 minutes. And because we spent that time pre-shading through wash and dry brush and the zenithal highlight, the combination of those three techniques, and doing them in that order, this is the result we get. But I thought, while we're here, let's talk about how then we can continue to use those to go up higher. So over here on my palette, I've got some pale flesh, or light flesh, as it were, Vallejo model color light flesh, which is one of my favorites for highlighting purple. Flesh color is a good way to get purple to be brighter without actually making it look bad, I guess is what I would say. I don't know how else you would put that. Purple or flesh tone is your key. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just dry brushing over this. Okay, I'm going to re-go over my glaze, and you'll notice I have almost no paint on my brush, and I'm just doing a lot of little touches. Right? We're just dragging it back and forth very slowly. Or I suppose not very slowly. I'm very slowly building up the paint. I'm not slowly touching the brush to the thing. I'm actually quite quickly touching the brush to the thing. And I have very, very, very little paint on the brush because I want each little stroke to leave behind only the smallest amount of paint on the most raised areas. Right? I don't want to actually have it leave behind a bunch of paint and get chalky and stuff like that. Flesh color also tends to get chalky a lot less than pure white. So there we go. I'm just going to do that one little triangle here on camera. But we can see there how now this wing compared to this one above it, right? So here, compared to here, how much more we've picked that out. And we could then go in and glaze that again with another purple. We could glaze maybe not the whole thing. You know, we could just do along the edge now to sort of smooth it out. And you can kind of keep doing this back and forth. You know, this is about doing things faster and more efficient. And if you wanted to stop where we were before, that's fine. If you want to then take it to the next level, you know, you can just keep working with this back and forth. And that's really the key. You keep mixing these techniques. You do a little dry brush, you do a little glaze, and back and forth. And what you'll end up with is a really nice wing texture that's very rich in the amount of color it portrays there. And will really draw the eye to what is obviously one of the most important parts of the model. So there we go. That's this hobby cheating. What technique when? Let's review again real quick on your rough areas, your fur, your hair, where you have a lot of ridges, things like that. That's where we bring in our dry brushing. That's where we can really make the best use of our washes. And that's where those might be our final steps. On our big flat areas, like this guy's backside here, right? Here, we maybe don't even want to wash it all. We might want to do it all through layering and glazing. Or if we do, we certainly don't want to use any dry brushing here on this, right? When we want to work on a big area like this, if we do a wash, we then want to move to our layers or our glazes to build it back up to cover any kind of wash residue, shade residue left behind to smooth out those color transitions, okay? And on something in between, like say a wing, you know, what we can do is we can combine all those techniques into something that both speaks to the large flat area but also plays with the texture that's on here. So we can kind of just put everything together and get one nice technique for doing this middle ground piece. So I hope that helps of, you know, what to use or when to use what technique between sort of washing, glazing, and dry brushing. And I hope that this helps you paint some models faster and to a quality level that you're happy with. As always, I appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.